All right, what's up? Welcome in. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark, GC Live Wednesday episode of the show. We're going to be joined, we hope, by a very special guest. Dare I say, Chris, one of our favorite guests.
I agree.
Definitely in the top 5, I would say, in our power rankings that don't actually exist, but I can promise you Charles is up there. Charles, director of rankings for On3. He's got some maintenance stuff going on at his apartment or house, so we're waiting a little bit on that, but I believe we're going to be good there. So Charles is going to hop on and talk about actually some of the guys that are already on campus for South Carolina, a lot of the freshmen. We try to get him on periodically. We've not talked to him since that big final rankings update of the guys. Many of them enrolled early. So we'll go into that stuff. We'll, of course, talk about Jaden Sellers, South Carolina's long commitment right now for the 2025 class. And Chris, I'm kind of intrigued to start to get into some of these class of 2025 and 2026 in-state targets for South Carolina. So I know we'll go in depth with Charles. A lot of people who care about recruiting. Hopefully y'all found us for this one because I know Charles is always a favorite guest of you guys as well. And our favorite presenting sponsor is our friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933. If you're in the market for a new home, hit up Clint, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, want somebody who can help walk you through the process. Clint is your guy for that. When I bought my first home, Clint was the guy right there with me every step of the way. He can do the same for you and talk some Gamecock football in the process. Speaking of that, Shane Beamer speaking yesterday, sort of giving the latest 6 practices in. You have some coaches who will be talking later this week. And Chris, we're starting to see a few of these little storylines, I would say, play out. Maybe not answers yet, of course, to big questions, but there have been at least some newsy type things along the way.
Yeah, newsy type things. And, the injury situation for South Carolina has been pretty stable, right? Some bang ups here and there. The running back room, a little bit depleted right now, Wes, but obviously that's one of the storylines we talked about in the spring, right? You knew you weren't going to have Rocket Sanders. Now you're without Juju McDowell. You're without Walk-On Bradley Dunn there. So that means a lot of reps for Oscar Attaway. Shout out Oscar Attaway Jr. being back with us again. Enjoyed talking to your son, Oscar Attaway III, on the Garnet Trust Hour the other day. Hope you got to check that out. And Jawan Howell. And so Shane Beamer talked about those things. Overall, seems like it's been, some minor injuries, some bumps and bruises, things like that. And then a lot of talk, Wes, of course, about the quarterback situation, whether that's has there been any separation or not. And then, hey, do you make the quarterbacks live or not during the Saturday scrimmage? I'm sure we'll get more into all that as we go along.
We'll definitely talk some spring ball. And let's go ahead. Let's bring him out now. Let's bring in Charles Power. Charles, it's been a while, man. How you been?
I'm doing great. How about y'all?
We're good, man. Good to hear from you. Good to see you. Definitely always good to kind of check in and talk some recruiting. And I was looking back. I actually, Charles, I don't think we really spoke since that last final rankings update for a lot of these guys that are already on campus now as true freshmen. Let's start with the kind of big names that fans love to talk about. Probably no shock to you that we're already hearing reports out of camp at South Carolina that Josiah Thompson and Dylan Stewart have kind of been as advertised, already kind of making impacts, already trying to push into that rotation. Obviously go in whatever order you want, man, but seems like those two guys maybe already are hits in terms of that evaluation.
Yeah, I'll start with Dylan Stewart. They both finished, I guess, for us, just to kind of refresh everybody, they both finished as 5 stars for On3. Dylan Stewart finishing at number 12 overall, and Josiah Thompson finishing at 16. And I believe Josiah was our number 1 offensive tackle as well. So, it's got to see both those guys in the All-Star circuit in person, which was a great exposure point just a couple weeks before they enroll. I guess really for those guys, a couple days before they enrolled. Dylan Stewart, I think, getting off the bus after seeing all these top prospects, he is like probably the first guy you want coming off the bus, maybe of anybody we saw. He is how you draw them up physically. 6'5", 250, weight even weight just distribution throughout his body, and just a fantastic athlete. There was one point at the Under Armour game where he was covering like receivers one-on-one, playing DB basically just for fun in practice, and he could run with the receivers and running backs. So at that size, that kind of shows you just how athletic he is. And we saw flashes for sure. He had moments in practice, and he showed really well in the game. Had a big sack, if I remember correctly, in the game, kind of an emphatic sack where I think he maybe beat Jordan Seaton, the 5-star Colorado signee, off the edge, and had a big sack in the game. And that just kind of showed it was just kind of validated what we saw from him the past 2 years. I think he's going to need to continue to work on his technical ability. Like, he really is primarily a guy who wins with his athleticism and just size and speed, and just with like a lot of bull rushes and pure speed rushes. So I think once he gets to work on counters, using his hands effectively, I think he's got a ton of potential. I think he, has as high of an upside, maybe as anybody in the cycle, regardless of position. He's just got to kind of put it all together and just become a more consistent player, snap in and snap out. But he's got a ton of upside, and certainly not surprised to hear that he has already kind of made an impact. And I would think, if he does everything he's supposed to do, and if the opportunity presents itself, I would think he certainly has a talent to make plays as a true freshman. Josiah Thompson, really I've always been high on him, just from a upside perspective. I think we talked about him around this time last year about just how thought he was trending in the right direction as a prospect. Really, honestly, kind of trimmed down his body. I think he was lighter as a senior than he was as a sophomore, but I still think he's got a fantastic frame, really moves well. I think of all the offensive linemen, especially the offensive tackles that we evaluated, I thought he moved the best of anybody in the cycle. Just a twitchy, athletic mover, really natural, working in space, and getting to see him at the All-American Bowl. I thought he was fantastic in his pass set. If you watched him on film at Dillon, he wasn't really taking a lot of deep pass sets, which is pretty typical for a high school offensive tackle. With someone with his ability, he's not going to really have to make a deep set often, but he looked very natural doing that at the All-American Bowl. And I think for a guy who has more of a developmental body, I like the play strength. He could drop his weight in anchor, on contact, had some really strong reps in practice. And that's a setting that is really not catered to be advantageous to offensive tackles. But I think I recall him, getting the best of Florida signee LJ McCray in a one-on-one, kind of a best-on-best situation from that week. And I thought he played well in the game as well. So he actually started off the practices that week, I think, playing guard, and they quickly realized this guy's probably the top offensive tackle here, and put him at offensive tackle. But really just his overall skill set. I think the biggest thing with Josiah Thompson is going to be adding weight, getting stronger. But I think the natural play strength is there. It's just going to be kind of adding necessary bulk to hold up. But I would think, everything that we saw just down the stretch would lead you to believe this is the future left tackle, for South Carolina, if everything, goes to plan.
Charles, good stuff there on the Gamecocks, 2 5-star signees from the 2024 class. I want to take this opportunity to revisit a player that we talked about, if not the last time, the time before with you, and someone that I know you had a close eye on during his senior season, and that's Matthew Fuller out of Wayne County in Georgia. He ended up moving up for you all the way up to a 4-star, top 200, I think finished at 185 nationally, 13th in the position rankings. And one of the things that I remember you noted about him is, hey, let's see his yards per carry maybe go up a little bit. I think he finished about 7.7 on the season, but game one of his senior year, he had 20 yards a carry, which is pretty good. What did you see from him in terms of his progression his senior year to have you shoot him up your rankings?
Yeah. So when we were going through kind of updating the senior year rankings for the running backs, it was very interesting. And I remember talking to Cody Belair, who works kind of hand in hand with us in the rankings. He's a former personnel scout, just working with a bunch of SEC teams. So he's a lot of experience going through these type of players. And we were talking about it. And I was like, there's not a lot of the top running backs in the 2024 cycle did not really have like fantastic senior seasons. I remember getting to Matthew Fuller. I was like, okay, this guy averaged 200 yards a game. He played 10 games, over 2,000 yards. It was kind of refreshing to see as I was going through that ranking, getting to a guy kind of in his range that had a great senior season. And I think I'm not sure they made the playoffs or won a playoff game. So it was all of his production was in a 10-game sample. So I think he continued to improve there. I think he was over 8 yards a carry. I got his stats right here. Let's see. So we had him at 256 carries for 2,086 yards, 27 touchdowns. So, and also had 91 receiving yards and one more score. So he close to 3 touchdowns a game. This guy produced, I think he played defense as well. So I thought his stamina, ability to carry the load. He's a sub 1,100 meter guy, good size. And it's funny. I heard some buzz just after the fact, after he had already signed, of people kind of in Georgia saying like, we can't believe that this guy got out of state. So I think the general feeling for people that were got to see him play and just like boots on the ground there was he was a steal for South Carolina. So I think adding him at that position, kind of a position of need for South Carolina. I think you would kind of look at over the last couple of years at running back. I think he's going to just add to that room and probably be a talent upgrade over the kind of baseline talent they brought in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, and Charles, a guy that I think Georgia Tech tried to make a really hard push for there at the end, and they kind of had to hold off a couple teams. And I've actually heard is even so he's not a guy that's on campus, but has been kind of visiting for practice and stuff, and he's actually grown a little bit in the last few months, I've heard too, as far as adding a little bit of weight. Maybe he's gotten a little bit taller, maybe senior year kind of growth spurt. So very interested to see what happens once he gets to campus. Another guy that kind of made a late push in the rankings and actually has created some buzz already, Charles, in practice as well, is Fred Johnson. South Carolina likes their depth at linebacker, but there are those like early signs, early indicators that he's going to be a guy in the rotation for them, even if it's more of just kind of a second or third team type guy, but already sort of making an impact. What did you like about Fred Johnson and his kind of senior year as well, man?
Yeah, Fred Johnson is one that he was supposed to be in the All-American Bowl and did not make it for what reason I'm not sure, can't remember, but man, I think with him, first of all, I would have loved to see him in person, because I think when you look at just the overall physical tools, they're really enticing. Fantastic size. I think we had him at let's see, I think we had him at 6'3.5", 225 with 33.5-inch arms. I believe I remember y'all saying he ran in 4.5s at South Carolina's camp. So just right there off the bat, I mean, he has the traits to be a top talent at linebacker. And linebacker is a position where that's increasingly more prevalent. You see it's really arm length, speed, size, kind of athlete type of position. And I think he certainly checks the boxes there. I played on a loaded high school team as a senior. I believe he led them to a state championship, played both ways. I think love to see linebackers play offense. He was playing receiver, had some big catches, and you could just see his ability to run, especially straight line. I think he's probably more comfortable as a straight line athlete right now, but I think when he has a clear path to the ball carrier, he can really make up ground in a demonstrative way. And I just think the range and just physical upside has to be really appealing. So he's one, when we were doing these rankings, I was thinking, I was like, there's a chance we're too low here. So I wouldn't be surprised if he outplays his ranking. He would have been a guy that, again, like I would have loved to see in person, because those are the type of traits that I think you want to bet on, especially from an upside perspective. So, and another, I think, strong camp eval, by South Carolina. I think we think back a couple of years ago with Nicky Manwari. He was one who had kind of the freakish type of physical traits and played great as a senior. I think Fred Johnson's probably kind of in that mold just from a developmental arc perspective.
Charles, if you don't mind, I wanted to go over to South Carolina's transfer class as well. So, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. I know you watch a lot of guys, but you keep up with them throughout high school, college, obviously all the way up to the pro level. And so there's some names I'm sure you remember scouting and that you've kind of followed that I just wanted to get your take on in terms of, how they may fit into South Carolina here.
Okay.
Let's start with Rocket Sanders. He's the most obvious one, right? He's a guy that was pretty highly ranked in high school, played some receiver, 1,400-yard rusher at Arkansas in 2022. But just from what you know of him, describe, what you think he's going to bring to this program.
Yeah, I think that first off, I think when Rocket Sanders was healthy at Arkansas, he was a big time player, and I think pairing him, I think it's a similar type of situation, at South Carolina. If you're projecting like Lenore Sellers to be the starter, going from playing alongside KJ Jefferson to playing alongside a quarterback like Lenore Sellers, I think that having that ability to kind of play like the zone read or just kind of keeper game, he was very effective with that. And I think when Rocket Sanders has a runway, he's shown that he has big playability. So I think as long as he's healthy, that's a big talent upgrade, at the position. And I've been keeping up with kind of what y'all are saying, guys, and I know like they're seem to be pretty excited about just the overall infusion of talent at running back, just between him and the other transfers. I can't remember his name, the guy from SC State, and Oscar Attaway is kind of an interesting piece as well. So it seems like they brought in a pretty good chunk of talent. But I remember evaluating Rocket Sanders out of high school, and he was really kind of more of an athlete type who kind of became a full-time more of a complete running back at Arkansas. So that's not something we typically see. I think a lot of people were thinking maybe he could play linebacker, or maybe other schools were recruiting him for kind of a variety of spots. But I think it was the deal where he wanted to play running back and went to Arkansas to play running back. So, kind of a big size, speed, guy who is probably at his best when you give him, a clear path, defined runway, and he can kind of use his athleticism to make big plays at the second level.
Yeah, and even a guy that I think you had Justin Stepp recruiting him at Arkansas, man. So there's some talk about receiver as well, and I think he kind of just maybe outgrew that, and like you said, wanted to play some running back there, and obviously worked out for him. Let's get into maybe South Carolina's 2025 commit right now, Jaden Sellers. And then, Charles, while we got you, I want to talk a little bit about just that in-state class in general with some of the guys. But Sellers, a high 3-star guy on On3. We've watched him play in several camp settings, Charles. Not the biggest guy, and I think that's probably the thing that maybe hurts him the most, but skilled kid, can go get the football for a guy that is his size, I think. So what have you seen, and what can he do to potentially move up, or does his size kind of limit him a little bit in that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the biggest thing with Jaden Sellers is just going to be just seeing more of him getting back on the field. Missed a good chunk of his junior year, so really kind of similar to his brother in that regard. I think played about the same number of games, if I believe, as Lenore did as a junior. But I think with Jaden, the thing that sticks out to me is just the functional movement skills, like outstanding change of direction. I think he projects as a high level route runner, a guy who can get in and out of his breaks. Just really, really strong agility. And like you said, Wes, like plays bigger than his size. You were kind of seeing early in the season, South Florence was just snapping, like running like wildcat, like snapping it to him on direct snaps. And I think he shows the ability to run through arm tackles and just overall just kind of technical ability. So I think he's got a high skill level. To me, the biggest thing is going to be continue to get bigger, stronger, and just get us really honestly just getting more of a sample size on him, just from just not seeing it quite as much of him as a junior. But dating back to his sophomore year, I thought what he showed was really encouraging, and I think he's going to be a guy who certainly makes plays at South Carolina and probably projects, I think, most ideally as a slot receiver right now. But I'm looking forward to kind of seeing more from him, because he was a guy that I was pretty excited about just dating back to the past year or so.
Charles, you always have your outliers, that you are not afraid to. We always throw you kudos here because you're not afraid to be the first to rank a guy as a 4-star before he has a bunch of offers, or if everybody else has a guy as a 2-star, you're not afraid to rank him as a 4, or vice versa, right? So you've got an outlier in this class that right now South Carolina has not offered. He will be visiting this month, but intriguing kid, Jaquivious Dodd out of Eastside. He's a 6'6", 215-pound edge, has an App State offer, Virginia Tech, Liberty, Troy, right? So not this huge offer list, but you've got him pretty high, number 138 nationally, 4-star guy. What have you seen from Jaquivious Dodd? What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, he was one that we didn't know a ton about, and as we were going through kind of refreshing on for the update we did in February, he just kind of stood out with, I think, the size, production. He had 24 tackles for a loss, 13 sacks. He's a bouncy basketball player, and I think I was surprised to see his lack of offers kind of once we went through and watched the film. And we're kind of like everybody else. We're still in the information gathering mode, so our rankings are super fluid. But I just think when you flip on the film, there's a lot to like there. I think he stacked up pretty well within the edge group. I will say that the 2025 edge cycle, especially kind of coming out from sophomore to junior year, was not overly loaded. So there was certainly an opportunity for a guy like him that's toolsy, high production, good film to make a move. And there was kind of a group of maybe 5 or 6 that he was within. But I think he's interesting. I don't know, I was curious, and that's something I probably need to find out. Do y'all know if is he related to Kevin Dodd, being from up there?
As soon as I said the name, I was like, is he? That was the first time I've ever thought of it when I spoke the name to you. So I'm not sure, but seems like there's a good chance of that. And hey, I mean, Kevin Dodd, man, that was another one, didn't get a lot of love out of high school, took him a while in college. And by the time he finished, though, he was an animal, right? I mean, he was something else.
Yeah. And I think he was in college for a while. I think it kind of took him a while to, but when the light came on, I remember him making a ton of plays for them down the stretch of that. I guess that was the year that they made the national title game. But yeah, I think he's interesting, and really kind of reminds me a little bit. He's further along at the same stage, but reminds me a little bit of Nate Johnson, the true freshman All-American at App State from Gaffney, a guy who kind of flew under the radar a little bit. So it reminds me a little bit of him, but probably further along, more productive at the same stage. Nate Johnson at this point was playing linebacker at Gaffney and kind of grew into an edge defensive end. So I'm looking forward to learning more about him. But I think just the initial junior film I thought was worthy of some excitement, and I guess we'll kind of look to learn more and kind of see how his recruitment unfolds. But I thought Jaquivious Dodd was certainly intriguing for sure from an upside perspective. But yeah,
Charles, I got to definitely pay attention to from a South Carolina Gamecock fan perspective would be Malik Clark.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that may be a battle of the Carolinas. North Carolina heavily involved too. 4-star guy. What did you sort of see in him, and kind of what makes him a 4-star guy for you too?
Yeah, I think Malik Clark, it's good combination of size and speed. This is a guy who ran in the 10.7s as a sophomore. So and is putting down some good times so far this track season as well. And productive.
By the way, Charles, sorry to interrupt you, man, but I may be putting words in your mouth. Is he a high 3 for you guys? For you? And then I think industry ranking 4-star.
He's a 4-star.
Okay,
he's in On3's. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, I think just the ability to separate, really good play speed. He has some shake within his routes as well. I think good change of direction. You can kind of see him create separation at the route stem. So he was one that we liked a good bit on film. And I tell you guys what, ranking receivers in general is very difficult nowadays because there are just so many. I mean, I think we probably have already ranked like maybe 200 receivers or something like that. So to separate yourself as a receiver kind of in the modern climate is pretty difficult because there's so many guys that can run. You have these high schools are running, 3-4 receiver sets. You have some big high schools that will have 3 Power 5 receivers kind of in the same, group. But so it's very difficult. It's something where we get a good bit of clarity on receivers, like watching their technique in camp and how they catch the ball, technique, just hand placement and route running. But I think on film, I think you have to be really encouraged with what Malik Clark showed. And I would think, just from a South Carolina perspective, it certainly makes sense that he would be a top target. You think of 4-star receiver from Rock Hill with size and like legit speed. That's a guy that I think, fits the bill of being a priority. And I'm looking forward to kind of seeing more from him. But I thought the junior film and just kind of the strides he showed were pretty encouraging.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And a guy, I think, I think it's too early to start talking about must and stuff like that. But a South Carolina perspective, like you said, I think they want to kind of upgrade their high school recruiting at that position, and just being right down the road, right down 77 makes sense. Be a high priority guy. Maybe final thing we got for you here, man. The 2026 class in state, I think already just kind of seems to have a lot of potential at the very top of it, right there in Rock Hill, across town. We got Currents at South Point, House, big kind of receiver tight end type at Newberry. Jordan Gidron, I mean, he's blowing up right now. New offers every day. And then here in the chat, we had a couple people asking about Jalen McGill at Broome, who I believe actually just took home a state championship in weightlifting last week, just as a big time athlete, man. Very naturally strong kid. What do you think? Take it however you want it there, whatever direction. But what do you think of this 2026 in-state class so far for our state?
Yeah, I think it's encouraging. It's starting off with Currents. He is I'm sure y'all have seen this guy in person at some point. He's a really big DB. I think initially kind of came on the scene as a corner. I think it's likely he's going to outgrow that. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a guy who could maybe end up even being like kind of like a Nicky Manwari hybrid type of big safety, could roll in the box type. But I think the early signs on him are encouraging. I closely looked at the tight ends for our 26 update, and I really liked what I saw from Jamal House. Thought he was, just a really good athlete. I think a lot of times when you're evaluating young tight ends, you kind of have a lot of guys from other positions that kind of populate that position group later. But so it's always nice when you see a kind of a true tight end as a 10th grader. Very good basketball player as well at Newberry. So I thought his production and the film he showed was encouraging. Jordan Gidron kind of reminds me of Malik Clark a little bit. I think similar games. Both are guys with good height that can really run. Kind of used in the same way as well for their high school. So, and then Jalen McGill, like you said, strong running back. I think, early on, you kind of have to like what you see there. So we ranked a lot of guys from South Carolina this early. So I think that's a good sign. And I tell you guys what, North Carolina in 26 is pretty loaded. I think we had, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 guys in the top 50, 6 in the top 53. And I know South Carolina's in on several of those. So I think from a kind of immediate footprint standpoint, the early signs on 2026 are very good, I think, for South Carolina. And I think when you look at, the construction of the staff and guys who have experience recruiting, North Carolina, I would think that that sets up well for South Carolina to take advantage of in 26.
Yeah, an area I think they got to get back into a little bit more, certainly for South Carolina. Spurrier era, they were always grabbing a few guys here or there from the state. And I don't even mention guys. You got Desmond Green down there at Timberland, who is obviously in South Carolina. Donovan Murph at Irmo. He's early offer from the Gamecocks. Anthony Baxter off at some point. So I think an intriguing in-state class for 2026. Charles, hey man, we appreciate the time, dude. Is there anything we didn't cover? Anything you want to add that maybe our listeners here would be intrigued by?
I think we probably covered most of it. Yeah, I'm kind of like y'all. I'm paying attention to spring ball right now, kind of seeing, just the buzz out of all of these spring practices. I guess it's still relatively early, right, for South Carolina, so they haven't scrimmaged yet, right? So just kind of paying attention to how these freshmen are doing, guys that we liked. Obviously I'm going to kind of check in on guys like Lenora Sellers or Nikki Miwari, guys that we were always kind of higher on, especially like Lenora, considering he's kind of in like a quarterback battle and just I guess with the opportunity there. So I'm keeping track of stuff just like kind of nationally, just watching, going to be watching spring games and getting ready for, the NFL draft. And, this time of year is always kind of interesting for us, just kind of taking a retrospective look back. I was going back and reading stuff I wrote about Xavier Legette back in the day, and just trying to learn, just our processes and try to find commonalities with top prospects, guys, who have maybe similar paths or just, backgrounds, I want to say. So, I think Xavier Legette is a guy who's like a great story, as a recruit. I think, wasn't he kind of on track to be gray shirted at one point, with that staff, and ends up, in kind of what towards the end of his career, having a fantastic season. Always been a guy who's a hard worker, great athlete. And I think it's always nice to kind of see, that hard work pay off. And I think he's a guy who probably is going to, I guess, maybe be at the worst a day 2 pick, top 50 type pick, if not maybe sneak into late first round. So I remember following him pretty closely back when he was at Mullins, and he was a guy who, was a kind of a under the radar in-state type who had a lot of the positive indicators. So I find myself kind of thinking back, kind of when we get into April, thinking back on a lot of, just experience ranking these guys out of high school and what we can learn from the hits and the misses. So.
Yeah, how'd you do on the Legette eval? Looking back at what you said.
I mean, I made him a 4-star as a flyer. I think a guy like that now would he be ranked even higher. Now, granted, I mean, he definitely, there was positional ambiguity with him, and I think it's uncommon to see a lot of prospects that played all over the field like he did, playing quarterback, defense, really become a top receiver. I think often the general track we see with top receivers are guys who are playing that position from at least 10th grade on, because it's such a skill position with running routes and just ball skills. It's so technically oriented that it is a little uncommon to see someone like Legette pick it up. And I think that's probably played in addition to injuries, probably played into his kind of late emergence. But he's so physically gifted. I think he's kind of a rare type. And just, I think when you look at the physical skills and his work ethic, that kind of made up for just his lack of receiver development once he got to college. But yeah, I mean, I've just doing research on him and keeping up. I've always tried to keep tabs on in-state South Carolina football, especially in the PD. With a guy from Mullins, I would feel pretty mad at myself if I missed a guy from Mullins. Yeah, he was a guy who had so many positive indicators just as a 3-sport athlete, a guy who played all over the field. It was kind of a deal where this is the kind of guy that you want to sign, and you just get him in your program, let him redshirt, develop him, and just see what happens. And I think the more of those type of prospects you sign, there's just so many stories of guys like that at South Carolina. But he's the most recent one. And I think if you're a South Carolina fan, he would be a guy that you would be, it's just sort of like a really positive story. So.
Yeah, you got to be so happy for that kid, man. He's been through so much in his life, loss of his parents. And, I remember even when he first got to Columbia, we were hearing man, this kid is just a physical freak. It took time, like you said, for it all to come together. I think he had to build some confidence as well. He had a few drops his junior year, that maybe contributed to this a little bit. And, but it was once everything came together for him, there was no stopping this guy this year. So I know a lot of people here are just extremely excited about him and for him, his opportunity ahead. So we'll see where he ends up. We got actually one question here from one of our longtime listeners here, Charles. Just an eval kind of big picture question from Travis. What do you value more when you project where you project a player or where they currently are in their development? So I believe he's asking what they are at this exact moment, or is it more you're looking at the projection of who they can be in 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, it's a long-term projection. That's really what we're going for. What are they going to be in 3 to 4 years, ideally? Now, that's all to say. A lot of our evaluations, like we try to, like our evaluations are substance-based. So it's, can you give me positive signs and evidence that we should, be bullish on your upside. So I think you're always looking for positive indicators. And I think one sign with that is just continual improvement. You want guys who show progress from sophomore to junior to senior year. And by the end of it, really how you looked as a sophomore is far down the list of things that are the most important, I think, when you're trying to project on how these guys are once they get to college. So it's a moving target, but I think the way we look at it is evidence-based evaluations that point to long-term upside, if that makes sense.
For sure, man. Hey, Charles, dude, we've kept you a while, man, so we appreciate the time. As always great to catch up with you. What do fans need to be on the lookout for next on On3 in terms of next recruiting updates? And we just added Steve Wiltfong, man. How about that? Like, that's pretty amazing too.
Yeah. Super excited to be working with Steve Wiltfong again. He was, worked with him for, I guess, 3 years on rankings at 24/7, and have known him for over a decade. Just great guy. And I think there's not many like him that, operate with such a high level of integrity and just trust in his information. So, man, we're just over the moon to have him at On3. And I think just with our next recruiting rankings, I think we'll probably have a 2025 update within the next couple weeks. We're working on that right now. And then we'll have a 26 one in May. And then June is a crazy month with, on the recruiting, just in recruiting in general, everybody's taking official visits. And then we're on the road. You go into the Elite 11 finals, OT7 finals. I think Future 50 is in June as well. So a lot of events. And then we have a pretty robust update in July that kind of sets the table before the senior season. So that's what it looks like for us. Once we get through this 25 update, it'll be, a month or so of, pretty low key, just catching up on everything. And then June is going to be, full steam ahead just in recruiting. That's kind of our new December in a lot of ways, just with this accelerated calendar. So that's kind of where we stand. But yeah, we're just, on3.com, of course. I mean, all the everybody on Gamecock Central, and then we're very active on social media for anybody who wants to follow it that way. The biggest handles would be at On3 Recruits would be where you would find most of our national stuff.
No doubt. Hey, great stuff as always, Charles. Keep up the good work, man. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. See y'all.
Yep. All right. It's Charles Power.
It's Charles.
Check him out at Charles Power on Twitter. Hey, good stuff as always, Chris. And before we talk, we are going to talk a little spring ball, but man, it is definitely tax time.
Whew.
The countdown is on. Chris, luckily you've already made that phone call. 803-462-5576.
Yeah, I have. I made that phone call. I've taken that meeting. I've actually taken more than one meeting, Wes, with my guy, Larry Slaughter at Liberty Tax, a couple of convenient locations for you in Columbia, in the Midlands. Or you could just maybe you're like, I don't live right off St. Andrews Road. That's fine. Just give Larry a call at that same number, 803-462-5576. He and his team, they can help you, whether you're right up against it. And if you're on the stream and you see that chewed up pencil, maybe that's what you look like, because you're sitting there going, oh my God, I haven't filed my taxes. I'm not in position to file my taxes. I have no clue. I have no plan. He can help you out. It's getting last minute. You're right up against it, but he can help you. You need someone you can trust. Larry's got a lot of experience. He's seen it all. He can do it for you. And it's always good, Wes, as we know, to plan ahead on the tax front. He can put a plan together for you and for your family. I trust him. You should too. Give him a call.
And I mean, if everything else is equal, why don't you just support a Gamecock as well? Like that's
well, I mean, there will be just like, I mean, the people, if you call Clint.Hammond to buy a house, or sell a house, if you hit up Larry for your taxes, like there's going to be some Gamecock talk mixed in, right? I mean, that just comes with the territory. That's a bonus.
A great bonus. And so, shout out to both those guys, man, making this show possible for us. And we will get into some spring football here because we haven't hit much of it, actually, I guess, since last week. And so Beamer spoke on Tuesday. The only real big injury news, Bradley Dunn, walk-on running back, that position has gotten a little bit thin as far as just spring goes. I don't really think that's going to be much of a matter or a factor heading into preseason, heading into the fall. And, Juju's out now. We knew Rocket was out, but I think you have to be a little bit encouraged by what was said about Oscar Attaway and Jawarn Howell. And these guys, I mean, they've gotten, by all indications, a bunch of reps because of how light things have kind of been with the depth there. And, I feel like this entire offseason, Chris, a lot of it has been dedicated to just kind of revamping not just the running back room, but just the running game in general, the rushing attack for South Carolina. Bringing in a running game coordinator in Sean Elliott, bringing in a new running backs coach in Markwell Blackwell, potentially tweaking some things. We know it's going to be a kind of a run threat at quarterback. And so when Beamer kind of singles out, hey, we're doing goal line, and these two guys refuse to be denied in terms of kind of smelling that end zone, I think those are some positive signs. I never put too much into spring anymore. I really don't.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for, as Charles would say, indicators, I think there's some decent indicators about the running game being refreshed this year.
Yeah, man. Speaking of Charles and the scouting terms, I got to go back and listen and get my pen. Like I need to write some down. I think we might have gotten a couple new ones in there on the scouting terms.
Indicators is a good one though. That's one of my favorite.
I like indicators, and there are others. So he was fantastic as always. But it's a great point. That's one of those little nuggets that you hear where you go, okay, that's good to hear. Yes, it's just spring. It's one period of one practice in spring. But hey, look at last season, right? The run game for South Carolina, as much of a revelation as Mario Anderson was, it was a struggle. This was a team that relied very heavily on the pass. And one big reason for that was they couldn't run the ball effectively. And there were a lot of times, Wes, where they would get in shorter yard situations. And you're going, I mean, remember, Wes, it almost became like you and I would be texting during games about it. Like it's a 3rd and 2, and you're just going, I mean, what's your play here? Normally
throw the ball.
You'd like it to be your play is run the football, but you just didn't feel confident in those circumstances. And so, now you start looking at the picture from a personnel standpoint, whether it's running quarterbacks, offensive line, hopefully taking a step forward, or the personnel in your running back room, including Attaway and Howell, not just Braswell and not just Rocket Sanders, right? But the room as a whole, you feel like you have an opportunity in those short yardage situations to be better. And so that's obviously going to be critical for this team coming up this year.
Yeah, good point from Craig here. How many times was South Carolina in 2nd and 9 or 10 just based on, trying to establish some threat of the running game on first down, and then you're in 2nd and long, and then you feel like I'm probably going to be in third. How many times if you're in 2nd and long do you end up being in 3rd and long if you don't have a rushing attack? It really just kind of handcuffs you as a play caller because if you then you feel like you can't throw the ball on first down because if it's incomplete, you're at 2nd and 10, and you don't feel comfortable that you can run the ball for 4, 5, 6 yards on that 2nd and 10 to turn it into a 3rd and medium either. So it handcuffs you a lot. Travis asked, was there a running game coordinator last year? No. And really most of that, if you don't have a running game coordinator, a lot of that ends up falling just on your offensive coordinator, probably with some input from your O-line coach, depending on how things are structured at that given school. But I think Elliott will make an impact on that. And to speaking of words and phrases, one of Chris's favorites, your kind of margin for error. I look at running game success or lack of success, like the margins are so razor thin. I feel like it's really like a lot of things in football. It's really never any one particular thing or issue. It's always kind of a combination of everything. You look at last year, lack of depth on the offensive line. They struggled to find who the main top offensive tackles were going to be off the bat. Then you had more injuries stack up. You had questions at running back itself. And then, of course, Spencer was great, but Spencer's not a run-first quarterback. So I look at this year for South Carolina, you don't have to make just entirely incredible improvements on all those areas. But I feel like if you can make kind of, Chris, incremental improvements in all those areas, you get a little bit better as far as your run game scheme, a little bit better on the O-line as far as creating some room. I think they're going to honestly be a good bit better at the running back position. Then you add in a quarterback run threat. If you're a little bit better in all those areas and maybe more than a little bit better in one of those areas, you would imagine that overall that's going to make for a better rushing attack for this team. Now, the other sort of variable, none of this is in a vacuum. You're going to go for being able to throw the ball to there being lots of questions about your passing attack. So do teams turn around and say, wait, we're putting this extra guy in the box. We're going to force them to show that they can throw the ball. So in football, there are all these little things that ultimately create the result. But I do think there's reason, if you're a Gamecock fan, to be pretty, I would say at least confident that there's going to be some level of improvement to this rushing attack.
Yeah, it would be very surprising if not. And I think a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm not, it couldn't get any worse guy, because it almost always can. But the bar when you're looking at last season is fairly low. And so if you show, a baseline, even if you have kind of an average run game, Wes, you're probably going up from there. But then there's also some reasons to feel like, hey, it's not a stretch to be, if you sat here and predicted, I think it's going to be a lot better. I don't think you could be laughed out of the room or anything, but it is just like you said, it causes more questions when you're on the passing game side. It's kind of flipped, right? The hope is you can be substantially better in the run game, and that your passing game questions don't end up being kind of what they are now, right? Because your wide receiver room continues to progress, your tight ends, the quarterback situation as Lenore Sellers continues getting more experience, he turns out to be what you think he could be too. I think, Wes, if you're having to pick one, hey, we want to be really, really good passing the ball, be kind of reliant on that aspect of it, or we want to be really good running the ball and being reliant on that aspect of it. Which one would most coaches pick? They're probably going to say, give me the ability to run the football and then set up the pass off of that.
Good question here from Craig. Do we think Simpkins will start at center? Craig, I'm not ready to say that yet, man. Now, I did say when they landed him that I thought he was one of their more kind of undervalued pickups, just in terms of the reaction to South Carolina landing him. I caught some flack from a couple of people on Twitter for saying that I think that's a really nice pickup for South Carolina. Is he the starter right off the bat? I think Vershawn Lee is in the lineup somewhere. So it's going to be hard, in my opinion. If Simpkins just beats out Vershawn Lee, then, and I think he's pretty good. He's probably even better than I thought. But could Vershawn shift over to somewhere else and Simpkins start? Or could Simpkins potentially be kind of that sixth or seventh guy in the rotation this year that maybe is not on that very first depth chart we're talking about, but ends up playing a role during the season? I could see it playing out like that as well. Travis says he thinks Simpkins at guard, Lee at center. Simpkins can play guard, but played a lot more center to this point in his career. And I tend to think you're going to have Tro Ball, obviously, Marquis Anderson, potentially Tree Babalade at guard as well. That's sort of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But again, there's going to be a lot of dominoes is the way I would put it on how this O-line is ultimately configured. I think configured, like the configuration is maybe one of the most important parts of that conversation.
Yeah, and I do think it's a little bit different. That's not to say it's all, you feel 100% confident about it. Everything's settled. It's going to be way better. It's just a matter of who you find, right? But I do sense a difference between this spring and last spring on the O-line. Last spring, it was more like, who's it going to be? Just because you didn't really have anyone established and there were so many question marks. This year, it's more of you're still asking who it's going to be, who is it going to be, but it's more of because you have some options, right? It's almost more of some options versus not a lack of options, but just way more questions, right? So this group, look, if you're taking a prove it approach to the O-line, I get it. I'm there too, right? Ultimately, you still have to go and prove it. But right now, we're kind of working off on paper and a little bit of what we've seen and a little bit of what we've heard. And I do think there are some signs of encouragement there up front, which is obviously one of the big areas that this team has to improve in.
Yeah, we just got to see how it all plays out. And Chalk here, I guess how you pronounce that on Twitter X, mentioning Tree at guard, or reacting to Tree at guard. I just think if Josiah, all that depends on how quickly Josiah becomes the player that I think he's going to be. And, is that right off the bat? Maybe, maybe not. If it is, I think that would open up some things. Now, they really like Cason Henry at right tackle. I wonder, do you slide Tree to right tackle and have him battle it out there? Potentially, but do you have him at guard? I mean, all these things, though, if it plays out like that, if Simpkins is pushing Vershawn Lee, if Josiah is pushing Tree, if Tree moves inside and is pushing one of these other guards that's already played a lot, all those things are good things because in a perfect world, and they could find themselves in this spot, Chris, you want to be having position battles because multiple guys are pushing for a spot, which is a very different thing than what I think we saw at offensive tackle going into last year.
Yep.
Where it really just felt like they were sitting there waiting on a couple of guys to, not waiting, but you know what I'm saying, hoping who's going to step up and take these two spots. Remember how late into camp those discussions and battles went? That's certainly what you want to avoid this year.
Yeah, and I think it goes back exactly what I was saying. The options, you have more of them. Your lack of answers right now is, again, not that they've got it all figured out, not that it's all settled and it's going to be a top 5 O-line in the country. Nobody's saying that, right? But the improvement that we expect, I think there's legitimate reasons for it, and the questions that you have about this line are a little bit more related just to the competition level, right? Because you've got guys that can play multiple positions, have experience at different positions, and there are some legitimate, I think, Wes, battles positionally along the offensive line that may, frankly, not get settled until a little bit closer to game one, not during spring, not right after spring. I think some of these competitions are going to keep going until closer to the Old Dominion game.
Yeah, Shane Beamer was asked about the defensive line as well earlier this week and kind of spoke to, I think, obviously some improved depth there at that edge spot. I thought Carolina was fairly deep inside on the D-line last year. I think there's similar depth, probably a little bit more depth there, at least on paper going into this year as well. I actually, if you go back and look, I do think they ended up stopping the run last year a good bit better maybe than they're given credit for on defense as a whole. You had an all-SEC linebacker in Debo Williams as well, which, I think that position group has made a big jump. But Chalk here asking about the D-line in general. I mean, I hear, Chris, a lot of Kyle Kennard buzz at edge. You obviously have Dylan Stewart coming along. You have some returners, Brian Thomas Jr., who's played a lot of ball. You can kind of go down the line there and feeling at least that there are more guys who could go out there and rush the passer at that edge spot. Gilbert Edmond seems to be fitting right back in as he's returned back to South Carolina as well.
Yeah, there've been no, haven't heard any. Maybe there has been some, West. Haven't heard anything like people are mad at Gilbert. He's not. The little bit we've observed, it's almost like he didn't really leave. I mean, the guys know him for the most part. Obviously, there's some freshmen, there's some transfers that weren't around in 2022, but a lot of the guys know him, right? He knows Sterling Lucas. The defensive staff is familiar with him. A lot of the players are familiar with him. And so he seems to have integrated well. The depth at edge is something that Shane Beamer talked about the other day. And I think you kind of loop in, obviously, two different positions and responsibilities. But if you just look at D-line depth as a whole, again, you're not going to play these games on paper. The schedule's incredibly difficult. There's still a prove it element to a lot of this. Yes, that's kind of the standard disclaimer. But on paper, there's no doubt that they've got more depth at those spots, provided they can stay healthy. And that includes, I think, defensive tackle too, Wes, because you've added in, DeAndre Jules, and you've added in Monkel Goodwine from Alabama. You've got more depth overall there, and you've got some different body types and skill sets, I think, at edge and along the defensive line as a whole.
Yeah, I failed to mention Dez Umeozulu at edge as well. He's in the rotation. Being asked here about Jerome Simmons. He's not on campus yet. I think Jerome, probably a guy you want to just learn this year and then potentially try to get in that rotation next season when you lose a lot of these veterans. But I look at those two interior D-line spots, frankly, as just being like co-starters for a lot of those guys. Like, you obviously have Tonka, you have Boogie, you have the addition of DeAndre Jules, you have TJ Sanders, who may be the most talented of the entire bunch, honestly, frankly. And so all those guys are co-starters, in my opinion. Then you throw in Nick Barrett, who's played a lot of ball at this point in his career. Goodwine, I think, has been a little bit more in the rotation this spring than I anticipated personally. You've had some guys maybe banged up here or there at that spot as well that have been in and out in practice. But if you look at those spots, to me, Chris, they're definitely deeper. I want to know, can the cream rise to the top? Like, who in that group among all the guys up front can take that next step to where, essentially they can be a difference maker, and maybe they say, hey, I'm not a co-starter. I'm a starter. Like, I'm taking hold, and I want to be an all SEC type player, which I think will be fascinating to see if some of those guys can kind of take that next step from there. One final thing I do want to hit real quick before we get out of here, Chris. Quarterbacks, scrimmage on Saturday. We talked about this earlier on the radio, but there's not always a lot of crossover between the two. Would you make the quarterbacks live in Saturday's scrimmage or not?
I've kind of made up a theory for this where you go close to live, but not quite. And I don't know. I don't have a name for this. Maybe it already exists. Might be some coach on here that says, you idiot, we do that all the time. But I would say, Wes, let's not have as quick a whistle as you see in practice sometimes, where quarterback breaks the pocket or a guy breathes on a quarterback when he's pass rushing and the whistle blows and everybody, including the quarterback, is mad at the coach because you ended the play. Let's make him a little bit uncomfortable, right? But let's not go out there and be absolutely trying to destroy somebody, right, who's on your team. Because, look, you just don't want that to happen. We were talking earlier. I mean, this can happen in any practice, right? But in scrimmage situations with your quarterback. Remember Perry Orth in 2016? He got tackled to the ground, broke his collarbone on his non-throwing shoulder. He was live. And so you just don't want it to happen in that setting. It's football. It's a violent sport. But also at the same time, I do understand you need your players to tackle. You need your quarterbacks to be able to understand that they're going to have to take a hit and stand in the pocket sometimes. So how can you kind of meet in the middle? And that's, of course, one of the challenges of coaching.
Yeah, and I see the pros and the cons, man. That's one of those things that I'm glad I'm not the guy making those decisions. Like if you can get away with it, I see all the benefits. The problem is you don't have a crystal ball, so you don't know if you're going to get away with it or not. I kind of feel like if you go out there, if you get 16 hurt, you're kicking yourself. And we're a long way away from September, but maybe you miss a ton of spring reps, which are very important. So, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I can see let's thud the quarterbacks, but not necessarily tackle them to the ground. Now, some people may say, hey, look, football, sometimes it just happens. I get it. But you can do things to minimize injuries, especially at certain positions. And I just, look at the fact, and this was not a contact thing, but go back to year one. Doty gets hurt in practice, and that was nothing that could have been avoided by any means. But the example of what that meant to have your projected number one quarterback out, going in, and then it ended up affecting him throughout the year, ended up having to be shut down. So I keep going back and forth. I'm very curious to see what South Carolina does. Ultimately, I don't know if the benefits outweigh the potential downside there. Yeah. But we'll see. I certainly I would have my young guys, Dante Reno, your true freshman, he's probably going live, right?
Sorry, Dante. Exactly.
Which is what they did even last August. They had the younger guys going live, and then they had Rattler and Doty, which would have been your 1 and your 2 at that particular time. They were not live, which is typically what you see. But every coach is going to have their own approach to this, and these are runners as well. So how does that affect your decision in that you're trying to get a real evaluation? I don't think if I wanted to get them hit, Chris, I don't think I'd go more than maybe one scrimmage. Like maybe you risk it one scrimmage and then see what's there. But also the defense has been ahead of the offense so far. So I definitely don't want to turn loose that defense onto a work in progress offense and get these guys hit a bunch. So that'll be fascinating to see what they decide to do. All right, I think we're out of time, man. Chris, you got any closing thoughts, or we'll just save it for next time?
Save it for next time. That's my standard, I feel like, but I don't have unlimited content, Wes, so it's all right.
I thought you did.
No, I don't.
I was always told when I was in school at USC 100 years ago that you should always ask, do you have anything else to add? And sometimes, most of the time, if you're interviewing someone and you say, do you have anything else to add? Not that I'm interviewing you, but I asked Charles, do you have anything else to add, Charles? And then he said no, but then he talked for about 3 more minutes. So
yeah, that's
sometimes people say no, but then they give you a tidbit.
Well, Wes, that's the difference. You're a trained journalist, and I moonlight as a sports writer.
No, that's not true.
Nah.
All right, we're gonna let everybody get out of here. Chris is out of content apparently. So for Chris, I'm Wes. Appreciate all of y'all for joining in as always. Big numbers today. Appreciate the support. We'll see y'all very, very soon. And throughout the week, South Carolina women's basketball coverage on GamecockCentral.com. Chris Wellbaum live from Cleveland. Check it out. Y'all have a good one. We'll talk to y'all soon.